All right, so let's start in with these 20 points, 20 that I want to make surrounding this gospel style. What does it mean to use specific musical tools that remind us of, or that sort of pay deference to that sound, that gospel sound? How can you and I, as listeners, just as music appreciators, really identify and name what these things are that sound so gospel-ish? If you're a practitioner, what does it mean to actually play some of these tools, to use some of these tools, regardless of what instrument you may play, to try to get that sound? So let's jump in. The first point I want to make is that the use of a plagal cadence is often used in gospel music. I suppose it's no mystery that the plagal cadence is often associated with the end of a church hymn, that amen that's at the end, right? Amen, that you'd hear at the end of a typical Christian hymn, Catholic, Protestant, Methodist, AME, Zionist, whatever the faith happens to be under Christianity. Oftentimes a traditional hymn ends that way with an amen. This is a plagal cadence. I'll mention tangentially here, if you want to know more about any of these points, in the intermediate video and also in the advanced or professional video, I go deep into the construction of plagal cadences and why they exist and how we construct them and how we use them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For now, suffice it to say, this big word, plagal cadence, identify that with, or associative learning, associate that with the amen at the end of a Christian hymn. And so, that intro that you just heard, this in 3 different octaves. I guess I started here, here, and here. That's the 4-to-1. So here it is. Here's 4-1, and again an inversion of, or a variation of, and then back to 1. So you hear that amen, kind of imbued right in there. The second point I want to make is that one of the sort of characteristic sounds, especially in piano playing for this gospel style, is to have sixths that walk, sixths that sort of move in a parallel direction. And I'm using those, I call these inner sixths because they're inside of the chord that I'm creating with both hands. Take a peek. Let's look here. There's a big fat chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 notes. But as I move into this plagal cadence, I'm doing this. Notice the inside of that voicing, and these guys march down, and they march down, and they march up. So they work in parallel with each other, and here's the kicker. They are a sixth apart. Let's look carefully here. From here to here, inclusive should be 6 tones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here's that introduction one more time to just button this up. Plagal cadence, that amen, that 4-to-1 sound, and the inner workings of sixths. Isn't that awesome? So I'll leave it there. Tangentially about the sixths, there's all kinds. There's major and minor sixths, and sometimes we relate them to keys, and sometimes we use them chromatically and diatonically. All of these types of things I discuss in the other videos, if you are interested in that. I've got tons more to share with you just now. So moving along to the third and fourth points. The third point I want to make really involves the sound of the blues. I think that's one of the things about the gospel tradition is there are so many attachments, tendrils, connections between that gospel sound and a bluesy sound. So let's have a quick field trip into blues and at least that sound. And I'm just going to really, this is the tip of the iceberg, folks. I'm not really getting deep into this, but there are sounds that we have that we associate with blues. One of them is that, and this. I'm tapping into something called the blues scale, which is essentially a minor pentatonic scale with a quote-unquote blue note right smack in the middle. Here's some G's walking in. That guy right there. So that's the third point that I want to make is I'm just starting to tip the iceberg, to tap into this bluesy sound. So the beginning, of course, was almost a classical sound. There were no affectations, no inflections in there. But the third iteration is this. Already, oh, that's not this. It's this, right? And that, and this, right? The fourth point I want to make is, I've already touched on it, is dominant implications. Again, a big word, but I just want to share with you, dominant chord is a seventh chord. And it's a seventh chord that is a whole step or two half steps away from the octave. So very, very simply, this is just a standard major chord. I mean, even if you don't play, if you're just a music appreciator, we can hear that that's a major chord. If I take that G and I put it on the top, there's 8, the octave, or 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If I go down one note, that's 7. And if I go down one more, that's a lowered seventh, or musicians say a flat 7. And that's the key to the dominant sound, is to use that lowered seventh. So it's a major triad. There's the octave, there's the regular 7, there's the flat 7. So that sound gives you that sort of really rootsy, bluesy sound. So the combination of the blues scale or blues isms coupled with this use of a dominant chord takes what started as this sort of inside classical G major sort of sound and starts to kind of take it to church, for lack of a better word. So buttoning this third and fourth point up, and for the context, I'll give you this is sort of the classical plagal cadence style walking sixths or inner sixths that we talked about. And here, inner sixths as well, but notice that F natural, oh, and how I kind of grease into that. So that's my third and fourth points. I have so much more to share with you. More to come. So let's keep going. Here's the fifth, sixth, and seventh points that I want to make in this little lecture on achieving a gospel sound, or at least identifying some of the traits of this gospel sound. One is a really simple musical device. It's found in gospel music, but it's found in a lot of different styles of music, and that is, what does it mean to be rubato in nature versus something that's in strict time? I love that word, rubato. I think in Italian, the exact definition is to rob or to steal. And so in music, that's really delightful, because we're robbing or we're stealing, we're taking away the sense of time, a steady sense of time. So rubato simply means to be played freely, basically. It's very hard to clap to it, to tap a beat to it. You'd never be able to dance to it unless you're sort of free-form dancing. Rubato, out of time. But that's such a wonderful contrast when you introduce a strong sense of time, this is my fifth point. So you can really feel that groove. that type of, and now I can almost clap, I hopefully can clap along with that because it has such a infectious and consistent pulse. So rubato versus in strict time. The second, the sixth point that I want to make is this use of chromaticisms. And I'm going crazy. What does it mean to be chromatic? Chromatic isn't necessarily from black to white or white to black. It's simply using the next adjacent note, a half step. If you're a guitarist, this would be the next available fret, a half step, the next one. So to be chromatic in nature, I can give you a very specific and simple example. If I play any tones and I ascend or descend and I don't miss any, black, white, indiscriminately, all going as I ascend, I don't miss any one of them. And this is the chromatic scale. That's different than what you and I are used to in a major scale. And so therefore, if we tap into the chromaticism, it starts to access some other things. And I find that to be very gospel-y, very bluesy. Hear how these guys slide in. Right? And also that left hand is lovely. It does this. Notice those notes. This E goes up a half step chromatically to the F, goes up chromatically to the F sharp, goes up chromatically to the G. So you'll hear that in the introduction. The seventh point that I want to make didn't make it in the recorded version, in the video version, but I'll explain it here. It's at the top of the second page, if you're referring to that music that I've provided for you. And that is this. It's simply the same, in the same way as I used sixths on the first page, those walking sixths. You remember 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm doing exactly the same thing in thirds. Let's take a peek. There's 1, 2, 3. Here are thirds. If you're interested in knowing more about thirds, majors, minors, as I had said about sixths and approaches and whether we do it in a diatonic fashion or a chromatic fashion or some other fashion, check out the other two videos. But for now, just an appreciation, just sort of an oral recognition and by ear, understanding what those thirds sound like. They're very placid. They're the inverse of a sixth. I guess I'll mention this one technical thing. They're the inverse. So here's a third, 1, 2, 3. If I take that G off the bottom and I put that note on the top, now I have a sixth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can hear the similarity of this and this. They're really, heads and tails. They're sort of reciprocal of each other. So, right. So the top of the second page, which didn't make the recording I'll play for you now, which is the same as the first page, but I'm only using one hand. That first page did this. It required two hands. You notice I'm using both of my hands. On the second page, I can get that same sound with this consolidated third by just using one hand. And it sounds mint, it sounds beautiful with the left-hand octaves. So there's the fifth, sixth, and seventh points I want to make. We're not even halfway done. I've got so much more to share with you. So this is so fun. I hope you're having a great time. I am having a ball talking about this arrangement and remembering all of these wonderful little morsels, these things that sort of go into the creation of the arrangement. So I'm on to points 8 and 9. We're almost halfway through all the points I want to make, 8 and 9. And this one involves my reading glasses, which is to say this. On page 2 of the arrangement, I want to talk about form. And you'll notice when you look at this, look, whether you're a literate musician or not a literate musician, it doesn't really matter. My invitation to you would be to either, save the PDF and look at it as you listen to this discussion, or print it out. But you'll see there's a series of numbers that are there. Those are the talking points of this lecture. You'll also see measure numbers. So, for example, at the top of page 2, that's measure 15. You'll see a small 15 off to the left. In addition to those two things, you'll see A, A, B, A, and that's the point that I want to make. These are not rehearsal letters, which you may commonly find in music, rehearsal letters or rehearsal numbers. These exemplify form. These are very sort of conspicuous markings to remind us that this song, even in its, even in its original state when Beethoven wrote it, was basically AABA in format. And I won't dive down that bunny hole deeply, but if you're looking for a few takeaways, that's one takeaway. AABA form is kind of a pillar of Western thinking. It's found in jazz with incredible ubiquity. You find it all over the place in jazz, but it can be found also, as in this case, a piece of music that's almost 200 years old, you can find it there. It's just a Western way of thinking, either ABA or AABA. In this case, it's AABA. So that's the first point I want to make. Tangentially, just to the left of that first A, that's measure 23, you'll see a squiggly line with a squiggly S with a line through it and a couple of dots. This is called a sign or segno, and that will come into play in subsequent points that I make, segno or sign. So that's the first thing, AABA. If you can at least find that, and we could count together, I guess I'll close with that on this point, which is, in typical fashion, even keeping this AABA form, if we get just a tiny bit deeper, we'll realize that each of those sections, each A and the B section, are 8 measures in length, 8 measures in length. And that's another indicator that this is right out of the, this is a chapter right out of Western thinking as far as composition goes. So if you look, measure 23, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 measures at 23. Measure 31, which is the second A section, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Measure 39, which is the B section, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And measure 47, which is the last A section, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And there, in that 8th bar, you'll also see, tangentially, a little message to us that says to coda. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but this is sort of a part of the directions of a road map. And the second time we go through this song, we have 2 passes here. On that second pass, this is where you and I would jump to the coda, which is at the very, very end. And for you scholars who like word etymologies and things like that, the word coda, the Italian word coda, meaning the ending, literally comes from cauda, the Latin for tail. So if you think of it, we have a head, capo, de capo, the beginning, and a tail, or the end. It's like a little kitty cat or a dog or something. The head and the tail. The tail is cauda, or literally the tail end of the piece. So my 8th point, AABA form. Just something that I threw in the mix that I felt was important, and an important talking point, that even amidst all these gospel stylisms and all this crazy stuff, at its heart, the DNA of this piece is just a box of Cheerios. It's a staple of Western thinking, AABA, 8 measures each. Next point I want to make is the 9th point, which is the oscillation between the 1 chord and the 2 chord. And again, I'll get deeper in the intermediate and more advanced or professional levels. But But suffice it to say, I'll give you a very brief demonstration. This is in the key of G, so I'm going to start on the note G, and I'll just play the G major scale. This is very Julie Andrews, Doe a Deer singing in the Alps. I mean, it's nothing. I'll bet my socks that every single one of you has heard that before. It's not a big deal. And what I'm going to do is make triads. Here they are, triads, 3 notes. But I will stay within the confines of that scale. Here we go. I used only those notes and I created some chords. Not a big deal. Here's the point. In gospel music, we often hear this oscillation between the 1 chord and the 2 chord. Let's go back to the keyboard just for a little bit of a laboratory experiment here. For demonstrative purposes, here's the 1 chord. I'm just building a triad on the 1st degree of the scale, the 1 chord. If I move up, I'm now on the 2nd degree of the scale, or the 2 chord. That's the point. Listen to this. Cool. It gets slightly deeper, but really easy to understand. Super, super easy to understand, even for non-musicians. Does not matter. If I take this G off the bottom and I put that G on the top, I have the same chord. It's just in a different order. I have the same chords, the same 3 notes. This is me rocking back and forth between 1 and 2. If I take this B off the bottom and I put that on the top, again, it's the same chord, it's the same 3 notes, and I'll rock back and forth between 1 and 2. Closure, here's the point. If I use those 3 different inversions, those 3 manifestations of the same 2 chords, I have traction and action throughout this entire keyboard where I can really have fun. But at the end of the day, all I'm doing is oscillating between the 1 chord and the 2 chord. Here's a slow example of that. Here's your basic G chord, 1. Here's your basic A minor chord, 2. End of story. Those are the only ingredients I'm going to use. I'm going to change the order of them. There's the G chord. There's the A minor chord. I'm going to keep going. There's the 1 chord, the 2 chord. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So how fun is that? And so that, I guess my cards are now on the table. That's how I got this the very last chord, I have a slight exception or slight variation. But with the exception of that last chord, every single one of those is either a 1 chord or a 2 chord. How awesome. I hope that your ears are like, wow, I've heard that before. This is a sort of an ism of this genre. So I have way more points to make, and I'm having a lot of fun. I hope you are too. All right, let's keep going. This is exciting because we're halfway through the lecture. I hope this is still engaging and fun for you. I just love talking shop like this. Onward, 10th point. This deals with bass notes, and you'll see a number 10 there at the top of page 3. And that top of page 3, this is the 2nd A section, basically. There's that sort of 2nd A section, just prior to the B, or bridge as some call it. I want to bring special attention to that 2nd measure, or that 2nd sound. So this is not a surprise. I have a G in the bass down here and a G chord up here. They fit together perfectly. It's not a big deal. This G is what we call the root of the chord. So without getting into triadic harmony or getting too deep into theory, Otherwise, just think of a tree and the roots at the bottom of the tree. They are the base, they're really the strongest thing that holds that tree into the ground. So this is no mistake that we call this G the root. Look, in a G triad, there's a G, there's a B, there's a D, there's 3 tones. I'll play it in root position so you can see that. There's G, there's B, there's D. The root, the third, and the fifth. But the strongest, arguably, the strongest point of gravity is that root. But if you and I think outside the box, this is where most composers and thinkers and musicians live, outside the box, we can play the root, but we could also play another one of these tones. How about the third? There's 1, 2, 3. Here's the third. That sounds amazing. And how about the fifth? Cool. Any of these tones that you play up here in this chord in your right hand, or the chord that you hear in the mid part of the range, can be used in the lower part. It just has a different sound to it. So here's 2 examples. The first one is fine. Here's the second example. Notice I've put the B down here. This is the first part of the chord, the root. Here's the third. And so now I'm starting to get into this. It's almost like one of those chessboards that has multiple levels, or actually playing the game of chess where you're thinking 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 moves ahead. Now I have this exciting entryway into another complexity of my arrangement, which is, what does the bass do in a linear fashion? Not just in a vertical fashion, but in a linear fashion. Bo, ba, ba, bo, ba, 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 ba. So I have this lovely bass line that is married, umbilically connected to those chords in the right hand. Delicious. That's my 10th point. If you look at the bridge, this is a variation of using a different bass note. The bridge is this, the B section there, halfway down that page. So the whole first half of that B section, I'm just holding the note D. This is using a different bass note while all of these chords are happening above it. A G chord, an A minor chord, you know? That's amazing. This is specifically called a pedal tone, Not a pedal like in your car, the gas pedal, or not a pedal like at the piano, a damper pedal, but a pedal tone simply means holding one consistent tone underneath as an underpinning, as a point of reference, while all this other activity is happening on top of it. So yes, I am using a different part of the chord. That's a given. But in addition to that, I'm really milking that D and holding it through the whole time. That wasn't what I wrote. But that pedal is a lovely sound. You could do anything over a pedal. I mean, you can really have a lot of fun with that. That pedal is a strong pedal. Here's the 11th point. If you look in the 4th measure of that second A section, so this is the top of the 3rd page, there's that 10th point, the different note in the bass. Here's the point that I want to make for 11. Wow, isn't that an amazing chord? I love that. It's crunchy. It's delicious. Now, I'm going to take the melody for a moment away. So I'm going to take the A. Da, 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 da. I'm going to take that A away. But I'm going to play the other notes that are there. Isn't that an awesome chord? There's only 4 tones that make up that chord, and they are symmetrical. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I could keep going. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Etc., etc., etc. I would keep repeating the same 4 notes. Mathematically, there are 12 different tones here on the piano keyboard, 12 different frets on a guitar. 12 different tones that we use in the Western world for our instruments, saxophone or tuba or whatever. We use 12 different tones, eliminating microtonal things and things of that nature, or bends or in between the cracks. There are 12 basic building blocks. So if we divide that 4 ways, that's where I'm getting these 3 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. The name of the chord is a diminished, and I've already sort of given that away by the moniker here, the label on the chalkboard. It's a diminished chord. I love it. I often, when I was a kid, I always thought the diminished chord was the bad guy chord. You know, you have all that, the girl tied to the railroad tracks in the old black and white film, and the trains coming around, and the guy with the mustache, derby hat. Anyway, but diminished is such a wonderful thing, and it's really a part of the gospel tradition. And I'm oversimplifying here, but I will just paint with a broad brush to give you the one takeaway, which is the diminished chord is used as a hinge, as a passing place, a passing chord, a passing collection of notes to get you from one stable point to another stable point. So, quick example. Here's this C major scale. Not a big deal. Here's triads on the C major scale. Watch how I use diminished chords to connect. If I go from here to here, that's fine. I'm staying in the key of C, but there's a connecting point between here, and it lies here. So instead of this, da, da, I'm going to connect them by doing this, da, da, da. If I decorate that connecting point with the diminished chord that we just heard, it gives us one of these gospel isms. Here comes the connection. Let's do it again. Here comes another connection. I'm leaving this F. I'm going to go up a step to G, but I'm going to connect them by using this. Oh, and this. And this. Sorry, I get a little carried away. Enclosure. There's that passing diminished which gets us here. So, more to come.